This meeting is coming back to order at 7:26 p.m. Item 7, consider and take possible action regarding items discussed in closed session. Consider and take action regarding the updates and including new hires, resignations, and administrative appointments. Number 1, Deputy Superintendent. Number 2, Interim Head Coach. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Motion made by Ms. Canoyer. I'll second it, seconded by Ms. Bichelle. Dr. Ball?
Yes.
Oh, she's not in here? Yeah, well, we'll
Yeah,
wait till it's
actually,
the-
I'd like to amend the motion. So I'd like to separate the votes for Deputy Soup as well as vote separately on the coach.
So, yes, we'll vote separately for each one. I read it.
Vote on an amendment.
Pardon me?
Somebody has to second that motion, and we have to vote on that amendment.
So I'm amending the motion so that we can vote on those positions separately.
The motion has been amended. Is there a motion to amend?
Is there a second?
Is there a second to the motion to amend?
And Ms. Eden, I made a motion to amend so that we could divide the Deputy Soup vote and the head coaching vote rather than have it clumped in under personnel.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
And 1 no. Motion passes. We'll start with Deputy Superintendent.
Motion.
Motion has been made by Ms. Canoyer. Is there a second? There is no second for,
Deputy Soup, and if there's no second, then the motion dies.
Oh, I didn't hear that second. What are we saying? I'm confused.
we're voting on the Deputy Superintendent, and we're going to do it separately.
But that was seconded, and so now.
Now we can discuss.
Now we've made a motion.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
And I want to, okay, good.
And so now that
So
motion's
for
on the
Deputy
floor.
Superintendent, is there any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Macias?
I'm trying to be careful about this because obviously I'm respectful to personnel. So the reason why I asked for this motion to be pulled is to discuss my personal philosophy, and I will echo that it's my personal philosophy, not a board philosophy, because I don't speak on behalf of my colleagues. But my philosophy is that with this deputy superintendent position, that we seek a candidate that holds the credential of a PhD. And the rationale for that request, and for the community's information, the prereq did not require a PhD. It was simply a master's degree. So in my 9 years on this board, I've worked with several administrations. And one of the things that I've noticed is that our deputy soup, if it had been Nancy Robinson many years ago, Alita Berra after her, were both individuals that had master's degrees. And both candidates were never going to be viable superintendent candidates for Judson ISD. Some of the districts that have done exceptionally well with sustainability have been Northside Independent School District, Northeast Independent School District. And what they've done is they've promoted from within. And they promoted candidates that held the credentials of a PhD so that they could continue to move forward. What Judson has done is we end up moving out administrations. When the Mackey administration left, Nancy Robinson resigned. When Dr. Montoya came in, he had some trouble identifying a clear number 2, finally making the decision that Ms. Berra was the number 2. In both instances, as I mentioned, in both instances, they did not have a PhD. So when the position came up, they could never apply for the position. So I will say that when Dr. Ball was hired, we opened it up, and there were no internal candidates that met the criteria. I will say personally that I did hope that we had internal candidates and was open to interviewing internal candidates for that position. Based on that, it tells me that we've not built capacity within Judson ISD to put in someone to be an internal candidate for superintendent. And as we talk the talk about building capacity, it needs to start at the top. So my thought is that we need to draw the line now and make it very clear that the candidate that is our deputy soup hold a PhD and be mentored into position to being an internal candidate at a minimum the day that Dr. Ball decides that she wants to move on or retire. And just for the record, I do support Dr. Ball. I was affirmative in her extension for her contract last meeting, so I feel there are a lot of good things coming. So I want the community to be clear. My position is not in a negative manner, not supporting Dr. Ball, but we're all adults and we have different opinions, and I have a different vision of where the district is. You're to assume that the recommendation may be someone that does not have a PhD, and that's why I'm going through all this rhetoric, so that the community is aware of what I feel is important for our district to grow moving forward. It's something that was stated in many of our meetings earlier. The definition of insanity is you repeat the same steps. So as we repeat the same steps of having somebody with a master's in the number 2 deputy position, we're not building the capacity that we need to essentially move our district forward beyond administrations. And so it's important that we send a very clear message that the minimum criteria for deputy superintendent be someone that holds a PhD. And I will tell you, you'll hear criticisms that there weren't enough candidates or there's not a good pool. I've heard that argument before. There's always a viable candidate if you're looking and if you're open about opportunity. And so that's my take on it, so that you understand where my vote is going and why I took the position I did. So I just wanted to be very transparent and clear about that from this end.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. Is there anyone else? At this time, board, you may proceed to vote.
Passes.
Motion passes 4-2, 1 abstention. Oh, excuse me, 3-2 with 1 abstention. And I would like to just say in conclusion, I'm very hopeful that because now we will be guided under the direction of the Holsworth Center, all of the concerns that Mr. Macias is having, I think that we're going to be able to see some changes because we have entered into this MOU with the Holsworth Center. And at this time, Dr. Ball?
You want to do the coach?
We'll do the coach first.
And then we'll announce, okay? Let me clear this. Did we already have a motion for the interim head coach? Need a motion for the interim head, motion made by Mr. Macias and seconded by? By Ms. Eaton? Is there any discussion? At this time, board, you may proceed to vote. Motion passes 6-0. And now, Dr. Ball.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate the 2 individuals. Like to congratulate Ms. Becky Robinson as our Deputy Superintendent, and congratulate Mr. Rodney Williams as the interim head football coach for the Judson Rockets.
Congratulations, Ms. Robinson, and Coach Williams, congratulations. All right, now we will go back to item 5, discussion of the fiscal year 2020 budget preparation.
Good evening, Board, Superintendent. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the budget, and so we're going to talk about some property value discussion. This is a requirement now under the first that within 120 days of adopting a budget, we have to discuss property values and the difference between current year funding and prior year funding. We're going to look at our current year, where we are year to date. Then we're going to look at our budget steps, what we have left. And then we're going to look at the legislation that's out there and the 1920 budget outlook. Just kind of starting off on the state funding scenario. If we had 4 districts that had a per pupil target funding of $1,000 apiece, and they had various students, and we have District A that had 5 students, then their target funding would be $5,000. And if their tax effort brought $3,000, then, state aid would be $2,000. The same with B. They have the same funding target level. They have 6 students, so they are able to raise $6,000. They have the same property values, so their tax effort brings in $3,000, and the state aid is $3,000. In District C, the same thing, but with 4 students, they would get $1,000 in state aid. When you get to District D, they have 5 students also. Their property values are about twice what District A, B, and C is, so they raise $10,000. So roughly $5,000 would be sent back to the state. So that's the basics of our current funding formula in the state. Just looking at some of our comparisons of our neighboring districts, always good to kind of know where we stand when we rank our districts by total tax rate. We have the 3rd highest tax rate at $1.44. Schertz-Cibolo and San Antonio ISD have a tax rate higher than us. Of those, San Antonio ISD is the only one that has passed a TRE, so they're at the $1.17 level, so that really drives them up. When we look at the next spreadsheet on the far right, we're going to look at property value per pupil, and you can see, again, we are the 3rd highest at $455,000 per pupil, and but Northeast and Comal are above us in that area, and so they definitely raise more per pupil than Judson would. When we go to the next page and we look at the ranking there of M&O tax revenue per pupil, we are the 3rd, actually the 3rd lowest in that category. Only East Central and Schertz-Cibolo raise less M&O tax revenue per pupil than we do. So just some interesting things when we start looking at what other districts have, because each district's spending limit is different in the state of Texas. Looking at taxable value trends, this is a chart that we looked at our previous budget workshop, but I did add the 2019. We got 85% preliminary values from Bear Appraisal District at the end of April. Looks like we're going to have about a 10% growth. About $10,600,000 is where we're looking at landing this year in values. And so over on the chart, that would be the blue line, kind of, you can see it going straight up. We're averaging right around 9% growth over the last 4 years. If you look at the second column of values, you can see it's a much lower amount. And so I put that in there to kind of show one of the pieces of legislation caps our value growth at 2% for funding purposes. And so I'm trying to project what that would kind of look like, and that's kind of the orange line. And so you could see that we would definitely lose some funding capability between the blue and the orange line if that legislation passes. So when we talk about current year funding and prior year funding. Currently, what happens in the state of Texas is the state uses our prior year values in the funding formula. And so this chart is kind of set up to show how that works. In fiscal year 18, we had values of 8.9 billion, $4 tax rate, so we had local collections of 91 million. The prior year, or fiscal year 17 values, is the 8.2 billion, the next step down. And so the difference in tax collections between those two is what we're going to call the lag. And so if we go down to the bottom, fiscal year 18, we have that same 91.1 million in tax collections. We subtract out our local share of Tier 1, the 82 million, and our local share of Tier 2, the 3.4 million. And so what we get in lag revenue is 5.5 million. So we're getting a bump because our values are going up. And so the next year, they'll catch up. So like I said, when we get to fiscal year 19, our values went up again to 9.6 billion, and you can see the 8.9 billion comes down and is the prior year value that's used in the formula. And if you drop down to the bottom on that one, again, we had a $5 million M&O lag revenue. If we used current year values, which is what the Senate version of House Bill 3 has in it right now, we would not get the lag funding, because where we have the 8.945 here, the 9.6 would be there. And so there would be no lag funding. And so with values, with districts like us, when we have values increasing, we benefit from that lag. Just to go, and like I said, in fiscal year 20 with our 10.6 billion, you can see our lagged funding is about 7.6 billion. And so when you hear the legislatures talk about current year values versus prior year values, that's what they're talking about. The effect has the opposite effect when your values are going down. This chart, the first two columns are identical. The third column, I hypothetically said that Judson's values decreased by 5%. You can see instead of the 9.6, we were at 9.1 billion. If you come down to the bottom, you would see that 93 million in tax collections, but we would subtract out the 96 million and the 3 million. So we would actually lose $6.5 million in funding. And this is what happened to the oil districts down in South Texas when the oil values dropped. They got the double whammy of losing their tax collections. They're collecting taxes on 9.1 billion, and the state's funding them as if they were collecting more taxes. So they get kind of a double whammy when that happens. So, yes, ma'am.
So, if they just did the tax increase on the sales tax, that would eliminate the lag, or is that what would cause the lag? If they did the tax increase on just the sales tax and left the property tax alone?
No, ma'am, the sales tax really doesn't have anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. It's right now, the funding formula for the state has the lag funding in it because they use last year's values.
Okay.
But the Senate has proposed this year to move that to current year values in their version of House Bill 3. And if they move that to current year values, then we would no longer have the benefit of that lag funding as our values continue to increase.
And that's Senate Bill 2, 3?
It's actually, they've combined now, and it's House Bill 3, but the Senate version. So there's a House Bill 3 that was passed by the House, and there's a House Bill 3 that was passed by the Senate, and they're a little different, and they're going to conference committee.
Okay,
and they'll
thank
work
you.
that out.
Thank
Yes,
you,
ma'am.
I got it. Just have to read.
So when we go on and look at where we are budget year to date for 18-19, we were projecting 187.8 million in revenue. We're at 146.1 million in revenue, about 77%, and that's right on target. A lot of that, we are just now starting to get state payments again. We go from November to March with no payments from the state. That's just the way their paying works, and so we'll get additional state funding here in the next few months. On our expenditure side, we had 200.1 million in expenditures budgeted. We're at 132.8 million, and this is through the end of April. And so we're only at 66%. Dr. Ball and the team has done a really good job of cutting back on expenditures. If you'll notice, we went into the hiring freeze, and we didn't hire people. If you'll notice, the salaries are running below. They should be around the 75% range, and they're running about the 65. So that's a good thing, seeing that some of the things we're doing are starting to take effect. So when we look at our budget steps, we're now in May. We're having our budget workshop here. Since we last met in February, we did staff with our campuses. We have provided them both campus budget allotments and department budget allotments. I have met with some principals and some department heads as they've requested. We've monitored the legislation and continue to do so. We've refined our revenue estimates. Right now, we're just using really current values. Current funding formulas, because we really don't know where we're going. We've built a spreadsheet to budget payroll because our current system doesn't really have a payroll budget module. And so we're doing that out of Excel this year. We've obtained our 85% estimated values, again, about a 10% increase over last year. We're having the workshop tonight. We will start to finalize revenue, especially as hopefully the legislature finally decides what they're going to do. We'll finalize our payroll based on the staffing model, and our campus and department budgets. We're entering those right now. And then, like I said, we'll incorporate any changes by the legislature. It comes June 12th, I believe, we're having another budget workshop meeting. We should definitely have answers and hopefully be just looking at one model. Tonight we're going to kind of look at three. We'll finalize the budget on the 27th of June, hold our hearing on the budget, and adopt the budget that night. So when we kind of look at our 1920 budget, this is a budget using the current funding formula, no changes, no raises right now, and no limitation on value growth. And if all that happened, we would be at about $174.4 million. Now, one of the things on the previous slide that I want to make sure we look at is when you look at fiscal year 18, if you see right there at the bottom under the 173.4 million, you see we were overpaid by 3.1 million. And so that gets subtracted out of this year's, and it's been subtracted out of this year's revenue.
How are we overpaid?
Numbers are submitted. You have to estimate what your ADA and all of your special POPs are going to be 2 years in advance. And so these numbers were submitted in November of 16. And so our ADA has declined since then. And so, for instance, in fiscal year 19, we are being paid as if we had 22,000 ADA, when really we were about 21,100. And so this year we're going to be overpaid by about $6.7 million. So next year when we start our budget, we know we're $6.7 million in the hole. We turned in estimates this year, much more conservative. We turned in actually 21,300 and I think 21,350 for the next 2 years. So this should not be a major issue going forward, but we have to deal with this next year, because they will deduct that out of our revenue.
I'm sorry, can you point to that on the spreadsheet? Because I was having trouble following where
okay.
that was.
Can
So
I-
that's on the decreasing values, and then can you move the cursor so that the arrow points at it?
I think I have to get out of it right.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I
Oh,
just
that's
was
fine.
like not
Right
finding where
here.
that particular value was. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah,
I think I was expecting that to show as like a negative number, and that,
I
okay, so
apologize.
it is a
That-
negative number
That
in our
is a
heads.
negative number,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
It's positive in 19 because we're getting overpaid, but it will be a negative in
Got it,
20,
okay,
right?
thank you.
Okay. So, when we look at that 174.4 million in revenue, that has that 6.7 million subtracted out of it already. And so looking at our expenditures, again, no raise, staffing at what we've staffed, about 185 million in revenue, in expenditures. So we would end up with about $11 million deficit, which is better than what we looked at the last time, which was 18 million. So we've definitely made a move in the direction. And I put in the percentages, the percent of expenditures, which is one way to look at your expenditures, and also the percent of revenues, which, like I said, unless we're in a balanced budget, I prefer to look at them as a percent of revenue, and would like to get that salaries down. So House Bill 3, again, I said it passed from the House back at the beginning of April, and it's been kind of sitting in the Senate. And so kind of what it's done, it's increased the basic allotment from 5140 to 6030, an I believe $60, $70 increase. 890, yes, increase. It creates a dyslexia allotment with a weight of 0.1. It increased compensatory ed from 0.2 weight to a range of 0.225 to 0.275, depending on the census block where the student resides. And if the census is a higher poverty census block, then we would receive closer to the 2.75, but nobody would receive lower than the 0.225. So an increase in our comp ed weight. An increase in the mainstream special ed weight from 1.1 to 1.15. And I think this is meant to help with a lot of the inclusion in the co-teach. An increase in the bilingual weight for dual language programs. They would increase from 0.1 to 0.15 for our ELL students, and then we would get an additional 0.5 for our non-ELL students, because dual language is an expensive program, and the state has realized that. It would expand our CTE allotment to eligible classes in grades 6 through 8, which greatly would help us in our junior highs, funding some of those classes. It creates an early reading allotment of 0.1 for students in K through 3 that are economically disadvantaged or limited English proficient. And this is what they're proposing for the pre-K funding. It would amend the transportation allotment from a linear density model to a flat rate per mile model. This helps rural districts that the linear density formula was really hard for them to meet. It increases our NIFA funding from 25 million to 100 million. And this is funding for outfitting new schools with furniture. It sets the yield on Tier 2 Level 1 pennies, these are our golden pennies, to 0.1016 of the basic allotment, or 96.48. And it adds one additional penny in 2021 that you can access without a vote. It sets the yield on Tier 2 Level 2 pennies, which are the coppers, at 0.008 of the Tier 2 Level 1, which is 48.24. It then compresses our Tier 1 tax rate, which is currently at $1, by 96% down to 96 cents. It repeals the high school allotment, the cost of education index, the GT allotment, the staff salary allotment, and the additional state aid for homestead limitation allotment. It would require districts to use 25% of the increase from the basic allotment to give raises to all non-administrative employees each year of the biennium. And then it creates a new educator effectiveness allotment with a weight of 0.012 for campuses in high-need census tracts or rural areas. And so that's really the basis for the House version of House Bill 3.
Excuse me, Mr.
Yes,
Atkins.
ma'am.
Again, like you said, this is only from the House. We're still waiting on the Senate.
Yes, ma'am. And so kind of throwing that into, and taking all that into account, we would have about 185.4 million, again, subtracted out the 6.7 already. You can see the salaries increased because we used 25% of our increase for a raise. We would have about 189.3 million in expenditures, and we would end up with a deficit of about $4 million. So really not a bad scenario from where we started 2 months ago. That's the House version. The Senate actually passed their version last night out of the Senate. And so it's a little bit different. And so their basic allotment increases from $51.40 to $58.80. It provides teachers and full-time librarians, full-time teachers and librarians allotment of $5,000 for each full-time teacher and librarian. And if the ADA falls below 18, 19, 11s, the allotment would be reduced. So this is the $5,000 raise, but it's only for teachers and librarians. There's really not enough funding to give anybody else a raise. It creates a new teacher incentive allotment. It creates a new performance-based allotments based on student test scores for our teachers. It also does the exact same increase in our comp ed that the House version did. The same thing in the increase to the mainstream special ed is the same as the House version. It does create a dyslexia allotment, but its weight instead of 0.1 is 0.12, a little bit different. It creates the same early reading allotment for students K through 3. It creates a new allotment related to accelerated campus excellence turnaround plans. Creates a new allotment for fast growth school districts. It moves to current year values to calculate local share of Tier 1. This is where we were talking about we would lose that lagged funding if we move to the current year values. It sets the yield on Tier 2 Level 1 at 94.08 and sets the yield on Tier 2 Level 2 at 47.04. It compresses the Tier 1 tax rate to 90% or 90 cents in our scenario in 2020 and 2021 if there's a constitutional amendment passed that creates a new fund by placing the severance taxes on the available school fund in excess of $300 million and some sales taxes on internet sales into there. And that's how they would fund that. But that has to be voted on by the voters. And it does repeal the CEI. Again, this is the Senate version. So when we kind of throw that in and do that, we have about $179.8 million in revenue, again, deducting out our overpayment. The raise is much more substantial, but only for about 40% of our employees. And so we have about $193.3 million in expenditures, so we would end up with about a $13.5 million deficit. And so that's the Senate version. So I would assume it will end up somewhere between the House and the Senate if they're able to come to a compromise. And that's what I have to share tonight. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
So what solutions are you bringing to us that will offset the $13 million deficit? What type of,
we've done the staffing, and I mean, we had to do
Right.
that.
What else?
We've cut our department and campus budgets by 10% this year. We have done some cuts in transportation, where we're going to pick up students at high school spots and deliver them to certain campuses. Other than that, yes, ma'am.
We've also looked at some of the programs and evaluated some of the programs, so some of the things that we're not getting our bang for our buck, so to say, we won't continue with those.
Can you be more specific about what those programs would be, please?
Yes, ma'am. One of them is called the TEACS resource system. So we will not be continuing with that. And then again, I apologize, I don't remember the screener that we're not going to continue with. iStation, thank you. Thank you.
So you've looked at all departments, and are there going to be any more changes that you'll bring?
We have asked all departments to make at least a 10% cut or more. So that is what we're looking at, and we're constantly re-looking and evaluating to see what other cuts we can make.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So in flipping between the three different modeled costs,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm noticing that the only one where there's a change, it seems to be, is with the salaries. Is that correct?
Yes, I tried to
Okay.
keep everything else the same.
Got it.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
are, all of these, like, minute changes to the funding formula, are those accounted for in the revenue, or, okay,
Yes, ma'am.
got it. So really, if the Senate's version of the budget passes, we're even worse off if they did nothing. Correct.
Yes, ma'am.
So
I mean, the
will call
concern
my
I have is
senators.
we're gonna have 40% of our employees that are very happy.
Right,
And we're gonna have
right.
60% of our employees that are very upset. And we're gonna be in a bigger deficit than if they did nothing.
Right.
Is there anyone else? Mr. Macias?
Yes, when will we receive the department variances, the listing of what the revenue was for this fiscal year as what's going to be proposed for next fiscal year?
By the revenue for,
By department,
oh, okay, you mean the department budgets?
yes.
Sure, we can get that to you.
When will we see them?
We can get to you this Friday.
Okay, I'm accustomed to seeing those. I'd like to see what's being cut specifically. So I appreciate you mentioning the TEACS resource and the iStation. One of the programs that we need to look at is also our IB program and what we're doing with that in terms of, is it bringing the return on investment? So when, Dr. Ball, when you mentioned about evaluating, that's a program that we reinstated, but now we're a year later into our budget cycle. What's been the return? There was a whole bunch of discussion on that program would be on full stride. So I'd like to know if it is, and if the recommendation is to move forward with it. And obviously, you don't have it here, so
Right, we'll add it to the,
I'm assuming it's doing well. But anyway, just let
yes, sir.
let me know what that looks like. And so, and we got a lot to look through, and I'd like to definitely have a better understanding of what's being proposed. One other thing, too, is you mentioned about the different versions, the Senate and the House version having sort of an increase. So we're going to be pulling for the House version, right? That has
Yes.
more of an impact for our employees in our district. And you had mentioned raises in one of the slides, I guess.
Yes, sir.
So can we replace raises with what we've been doing the last few years, which would be an incentive, retention incentive? Because obviously, once we raises, I'm assuming you mean we're plugging it into an employee's salary. Is that what you're?
Yes, sir. The House version requires us, it's a little bit convoluted, but it requires us to take 25% of the increase from the basic allotment increase. And of that 25%, 75% of that is used on a flat amount for all non-administrative personnel. And then the remaining 25%, we can vary how we want to give that. But we have to give 25% of the increase as a raise to non-administrative personnel. And so we can't vary from what they tell us to do on that.
So the funding that we will use for raises then is directly a result of the House or Senate bill?
Yes, sir.
And so
Yes, sir.
in the previous sessions, we were able to ink out, an allocation that was incentive-related without salary increases. Naturally, we're in a deficit, and if you're saying our ADA was off, where we're paying back $3 million and $6 million,
Yes, sir.
what are the assurances that the new projections are not going to continue? You had mentioned about we're going to be in a better spot. So how is that better spot going to be for us?
Our projection for next year is 21.3. Right now, we're sitting at 21,158, I believe. And so I'm hoping with the increase in pre-K enrollment and that kind of stuff, we're going to be really close to that 21.3.
So in terms of our average daily attendance, what's the percentage you put on here? Remind me. We usually use that as a measuring stick too in terms of what our budgets will look like. So where are you projecting our ADA for next year? 95%, 92%?
That is the ADA. We submit the ADA.
So
to
what is the
TEA.
percentage again?
It's 20. I have it at 21.3 for next year.
And please forgive me because
You're thinking of daily attendance.
Daily
versus
attendance.
enrollment.
Yes, sir.
He's
That-
talking about enrollment.
that's sort of what.
No, I'm talking about ADA.
Okay.
Our enrollment is around 22 something, and so our ADA is around 21.1. We're running about 95% of our enrollment.
Okay, and that's the number I'm looking for,
Yes,
that
sir, about
95%.
95% is where we're
Because
running.
we've played around with 96%, we've played around with 96.5, 94, so it's.
Last year, we get an attendance tracker sent to us every week, and this week when it came out, last year's was 94.8, and this year we're like at 95.6 or something like that. It's running right around 95.
Okay, so you'll keep it there as well? I guess
Yes,
that's
sir.
part of the whole thing, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then, Dr. Ball, I did request at this meeting that we have an extensive evaluation of our title income. And so was that provided in here, or did I miss
It
it?
wasn't, I didn't know if we'd have time, but I do have some slides if you'd like to see those.
Actually, what I'd like to know, and what really the bottom line is, we have title funding that we're reallocating for intervention with pre-K.
Yes, sir.
Now, that 1.6 or whatnot,
1.6.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
I want to know what the campuses are losing as a result of now putting the funding. So what are we cutting? I'd like to have a clear understanding per campus on what's being cut, because I'd like to readdress where I think that there's a need to put funding forward. And so that's something that I have not yet acquired, and I need to evaluate that, so.
And I know the campuses are kind of working through that because they're making that decision.
Well, I mean, you guys made the decision already to do the 1.6, so something had to be cut to equal that 1.6. So
Right,
what's
they're
being
making
cut?
they're making the decision of what they're going to do without.
Okay.
And so there might be 4 or 5 positions, and they can afford 3, and they're kind of making that decision. I mean, we can
When is
show
the
you
deadline
what
for
it
that to
is.
be submitted?
That's what I was going to ask. Is there a timeline, Mr. Atkins, that those campuses have to make that decision? Is there a timeline for them so we'll know?
There is, and we were kind of waiting until we got through with the displaced list, which I think we got through with last week. And so now they should be able to start finalizing their decisions.
If you want to submit preliminary budgets, I'm okay with that. I mean, we don't have to wait to the end. I'd like to get an idea of what's being proposed as we're going through these budget discussions, because I'm not, I would consider using fund balance money to offset some of these initiatives in a 2 or 3 year timeline to ensure we're meeting the needs. Because as I've maintained, this wonderful pre-K program is not going to meet the needs of every student in our district, because they all do not start at pre-K. We have a 20 to 25% mobility rate in this district. They're never going to see pre-K. So if we've diminished the services, and I've said this from day one, I'm concerned. So when I supported the initiative, there was reservations. So I'm going to see this through in the budget cycle, that we adequately give support to those children that are economically disadvantaged that come into our district after pre-K. And so that 1.6 is a lot of money that we're not allocating for intervention, and we need to close that gap. So the closer that this board understands that, we can take strategic steps to ensure we're addressing all of our students. And so naturally, I don't expect enrollment for, well, anyway, there's all kinds of variables. So I want to be ready to look at what we're going to do. And then in addition to that, I've had an opportunity to talk to several RTI facilitators that candidly disagree with administration's assessment of their need. So now I'd like to look at what our ITI facilitators are physically doing that mandated the decision to eliminate their position. Because if you burden the assistant principals or academic deans at campuses with what RTI facilitators were doing, you're overwhelming personnel that are going to say, I'm going somewhere else. And we have a continuance in terms of turnover, and we're losing employees. So we have a lot of mess out there that this title money is hurting. It's impacting the campuses. So I don't, Dr. Paul, if you have some comment, I'd like to hear it.
Sure. So one of the things that we looked at for RTI is to make sure that the RTI individuals are truly working with students, because we had several that were not working with students. But we could definitely give more information in regards to what the role of the RTI person is, but I can tell you that what we want the role of the RTI person to be is to be working directly with students.
And I understand that, and I think that when we heard the recommendation, that was the premise for eliminating the positions. But again, in discussing with RTI facilitators, several of them, they do more that support the campus so that there are other administrators and other teachers that can do that work, because now their work's going to fall on someone else. And so I want to be very clear if that's something we have to reevaluate, because we're going to be losing a support system. And like I said, if RTI facilitators were doing non-student work and they're going to be handing it off to assistant principals or academic deans, what were their purpose? Because now you've added a whole nother layer, because who's doing the work? And so the RTI teachers are going to do what RTI facilitators were doing? Well, if that's what's proposed and brought in, and I see that, then I'm comfortable with that. But I'm not going to assume that's going to happen. I'd like to see that plan, so I'm very clear that we're giving the support that we need to each campus. And that's not been presented. It's been stated, but I want to see it in black and white. That tells me that there's some thought process, and this is where things are going to go. I haven't seen that yet.
Sure, and we can gladly share that as another agenda item, so we can add that.
Well, I just considered it a budget type of thing. We're talking money, we're talking resources, we're talking personnel, talking title, and also, not to forget, state comp ed money. And that's something, too, that I understand that there's still additional positions that are going to be eliminated. So I just want to understand what we're doing at the campus level, because the decisions we're making are going to have a big impact.
Sure. And if the board would like to have another budget meeting in the next 2 weeks, we'd be happy to.
Well, you guys might not have time, but I certainly will meet with administrators, and I will make sure that I have all of the questions I need answered. Again, customarily, that's what we've done. It's not been a shortcut thing, oh yeah, we're ready to go. Our job is to provide oversight. We need to look at the budgets and think about what we're doing, not just approve a recommendation. We'll look at it, but we need to be sure that that's going to be the best course for our district. I haven't seen that type of presentation yet. So I was anxious to see what we would see today. It does not satisfy my concerns. So there's still more that needs to be done. And again, we don't have to convene, but as a board member, I'll meet with each department and look through every budget, because I mentioned that I would do that in terms of trying to get a better understanding of what's happening. So just know I'm going to need that information.
Can I ask you a clarifying question, Mr. Macias? So you started by asking for some specific information. Maybe now you're saying, I'm going to go to the departments and just look for that information myself, but I lost track. What do you want to see? Because I want to know if I'd like to see it too.
Well, I mean, I asked for title dollar information.
So the title
for state comp ed
budget.
information. The RTI facilitators are tied into the title, so I'd like to know if RTI teachers, as Ms. Canoyer stated, are going to do the work. I'd like to see that that's going to be taken care of, or am I being told, because I have been, that assistant principals and academic deans are going to take the brunt of that work that RTI facilitators were doing. So if that's the case, I'd like to be clear to figure out if we need to give more support to campuses so we don't overwhelm our academic deans and assistant principals. So those are the things I've asked for.
Okay,
And
so just so I'm clear, you're asking for the title budgets, and that would be by campus, because
I'd like
they
to know
get
what's
make
being cut.
decisions. And then, like, the way that the RTI responsibilities are being redistributed for the positions that are being cut.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And in addition to that, I don't know if you've ever seen that, Ms. Rodriguez, but there were budgets that we would review that would show the difference in terms of what the allocation was fiscal year wherever we were, what the change was, so we have a better idea of what was being cut. So that when we looked at it, we could see that TEKS resources was being cut and that, you know, all this stuff. I need to know that. I need to see what is being cut, and so we can discuss if this is a good plan or not. And it's certainly our job to do that.
Go right ahead, Ms. Canoyer.
I want to thank you, Mr. Atkins. I know that it's very difficult to do any kind of projections when we're in such limbo, waiting on the legislature to act. And so I'll get back on my usual soapbox and say that, you know, that the House version of the bill is what would help us the most. And so how you in the audience and everybody out on the interwebs looking on and viewing the meeting either tonight or later on is to reach out to your representatives, reach out to your senators. I know they're not all receptive. My state senator is not. But talk to them about the difference that would make at our campuses. If we're struggling between a $3 million deficit and a $13 million deficit, that's huge. And so we need your help. I continue to reach out and speak on behalf of the district, but they need to hear from parents. They need to hear from teachers. They need to hear from community members that this is hurting the public schools and this is how they can help us. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Thank you. Well,
That's all I have, ma'am.
all right. If there is nothing else, let me just remind you that we do have our regularly scheduled board meeting next Thursday at 6 p.m. on May the 16th. That is correct. All right. And I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. Congratulations to, pardon me? That is correct. I just forgot about that. We're going to have another special board meeting. I thought maybe I would wait until that was posted. We've decided that we'll have a special board meeting next Tuesday, May the 14th at 4:30 p.m. to do the canvassing of the vote and the swearing in. So that'll be next Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. There are quite a few other things going on that same day, so we're trying to make it as early as possible in the afternoon. If there is nothing else, this meeting is adjourned at 8:20.